Tokia, miyan ke kansan, miwele pana e sone pitoki pona. Hey everybody, I'm Greg Den3, and today we're going to talk about doing translations in Toki Pona. Talk about different topics and how you can go about the process of doing translation. I've got a couple projects lined up here today. We have the Mozilla Common Voice project, which is one I worked on last Munpi Ante Toki, last translation month in Mapona. And we have the Telegram UI, and then one more in here that is a personal favorite of mine. So let's go ahead and get started with the translations here in the Common Voice project. So if you're not familiar, Common Voice is a project that has to do with collecting together recordings together with sentences of people speaking in various languages. The idea is if you collect enough of these together, you can build a variety of different tools that help support that language, whether that be permanently creating like a resource for what that language sounds like and looks like, especially to help like endangered languages, or just in the case of like, hey, this language now has a big old data set that you can use for tons of different things, like creating automated tools like Google Assistant, for example. It's very, very helpful, like I said, especially to endangered languages, but it's an enormously helpful project all over the place. And you can see here that a lot of it is already translated into Toki Pona, but not everything. So they regularly add new strings. And these new strings, different things to translate, they just kind of sit around until somebody notices them and goes, oh, I'm going to translate this. Some of them are newly supported languages, and I'll be honest, I don't know how to pronounce this, but we're not going to worry about these right here because this is a matter of properly transliterating into Toki Pona, right? What we really want to look at is how do we translate these sentences. So example, upload of this clip keeps failing, retrying. So you're going to hear me say a lot during this process, context. Context is key. You need to know what context this appears in. And since I've worked with Common Voice a good bit, I can tell you the context here is you are uploading a particular file, an audio file, to Common Voice, but it's not working. Keep retrying, question mark. Okay, so things we need to care about in this sentence. We have a clip. We are trying to upload it, and that doesn't work. And then it's asking you, do you want to continue? Okay. Let's say that, so in Toki Pona, you're basically obligated to have a subject when you have a sentence. And so this sentence here doesn't actually specify an original subject. It just says upload of this clip, which is this whole passive voice thing. It's like, maybe we could say the tool is trying to upload the clip. Okay, so let's pretend that the tool speaking to you is me. And then me ken ala, I am unable to. So we have that idea of we keep failing in here. Pana, let's say upload is a kind of pana, right? Because when you're uploading a file, it's providing it to some other server. So you're giving it. Okay, we have an object, the thing we're giving, the clip. And we're kind of wondering here, what is the clip exactly? There are a couple different ways we could express it. It could, for example, be a lipu. However, throughout the Common Voice UI, we can actually find lots of different cases where we talk about kalama. We talk about kalama. So if we go over to the dashboard stats, we have our kalama awen, specifically kalama awen that belongs to me, kalama awen sina. These are, you could say, recorded, preserved sounds, and that's how the UI translates. That's how we translated the idea of a recording at the time. So we could go over here and just call it a kalama, not a kalama awen, because of course, if you're in the recording UI, you'll know very well, yeah, this is a sound object. This is a kalama. Mikenala pana e kalama. Now, presumably it is your kalama, because the only thing you upload to Common Voice that is a clip is your personal recording. So kalama sina, and then we have the question. Obviously, it's going to keep retrying. Like, the option here to keep retrying is like, we're going to alasa, we're going to try, right? That preverb. But it's asking you. We could say that the tool is asking you, mi o alasa, mi o awen alasa pana ona anu seme. Now that's a bit wordy, so let me break that down. For starters, the tool is the one that's actually uploading the clip, So it is asking you, should I, mi o, awin alasa pana? Awin, of course, to continue doing something, alasa to try, and pana to give. So should I continue to try to give, right? And that's a bit of a literal breakdown, but you get the whole idea in there. And then ona refers back to the kalama, so we don't need to refer back to that by its original head now. We can just say ona, and that's pretty clear. And then anuseme, indicating that this is a question. Now, we could also use the verb doubling format with ala between. There's not really, in this context, a distinction between the two. It's a stylistic choice. This comma can go, though. Now, here we have a reasonably complete translation of this original question. The upload of this clip keeps failing. Keep retrying. Obviously, in English, it's a good bit shorter because we have a couple of different things to establish in the Toki Pona. We're obligated to have a subject, etc. But overall, it does capture the same idea. I am unable to give your sound. Should I keep trying to give it or no? So here, we've got a complete translation. Let's go ahead and save it. And we can keep going through these. So here's a similar translation, or a similar string that we can work through translating. Presumably, this is the failure case. So if it keeps failing, it actually gives you context. It actually gives you context for where it's failing and why it's failing. So we don't necessarily have to provide that context. So long as we make it clear that the upload keeps failing, we have the whole idea expressed. And the reason why that's true is because, like, from the user's point of view, it doesn't really matter if it fails on the server, right? All that really matters is that it fails and it's not really going to continue working. So how can we express that? Well, mi awen ken ala pana. So it says upload of this clip, but here we can rely on the fact that we're in context. We know that we've tried to upload a clip. We've probably already gotten this upload of this clip keeps failing bit right before, so we can just go, yeah, that's fine. We don't need to specify the object because if the user sees the sentence, mi awen ken ala pana, they're going to go, oh, it can't give my recording. And that's pretty clear, again, from context. You'll hear me say that quite a lot. But here we've only expressed the first part of it. Mi awen ken ala pana. We don't need to specify the server bit because that bit is not really relevant to the user. So the next part is reload the page or try again later. So this is kind of two different ideas. We have that or in there, so we know we're probably going to use anu. There's a couple different ways we could express that. We could be like, try this or try this, right? But reload the page. Well, let's go back to Common Voice itself. Does it refer to itself as a page anywhere in particular? This is kind of the interesting thing about translating a project or continuing to translate a project that is already established. You end up with kind of local understandings of which things are what, right? Now, probably the page is just elipu. Osin elipu. So this statement on its own is, I think, not clear without the context of being on a website, right? If I say osin elipu, that could mean almost anything. You could be updating or upgrading a document. You could be refreshing a web page like we're trying to express. You could be doing a ton of different things. But again, we can rely on context here. The user is on a website, and they probably are familiar with the idea of refreshing a page. So we can rely on a speaker reading this and going, oh, yeah, osin elipu ni. And I specify that just to be like, yeah, this is this page, right? Not any lipu in particular. Anu, kama, sin, lon tempo, kama. So here are two options that the last part expresses. Reload the page, osin elipu ni, or try again later, anu, kama sin, lon tempo, kama. So this is one predicate with its object, osin elipu ni, and then another predicate, kama sin, lon tempo, kama. We've expressed the whole idea. So we can save that. Now, I guess it's a minor note to be like, hey, actually, this doesn't have a paragraph break in it, so let's just go ahead and remove that. And this is, again, a stylistic choice. It doesn't matter super much to the idea of translation itself. So we're going to continue on. I agree to Common Voice's terms and privacy notice. Now, this is actually kind of difficult, and the reason why it's difficult is because obviously we're kind of forced to use Common Voice as a proper noun, and that's one thing, right? But also we have these like very specific terms, terminologies rather. We have the word terms and we have privacy notice, and both of those are linked out to somewhere else. Now, fortunately, actually, we've done this translation before, and this tool that Mozilla uses to keep track of everything, it tells us what similar translations we've done before. So over here, we have this other translation memory where it's like, by using Common Voice, you agree to our terms and privacy notice. So over here, we can get like a reference for how these terms are translated before. And let me make a quick note about that. In the majority of translating, like the idea of translating Toki Pona, and especially in writing Toki Pona from scratch without translating something else, you want to avoid what is called a lexicalization. The idea that you would reuse the same set of words at a different time, right? Now, obviously, it is part of Toki Pona's philosophy to work like this. If you refer to lipu at one time in reference to a book, it doesn't necessarily mean book every single time you reference the word lipu, and it would be kind of silly to do it that way. And you shouldn't really treat specific phrases in this way either, right? So if I have like tomotawa, a moving home, now it can refer to a car, but also at different times you would want to translate it differently. So a tomotawa could be just a tomo. Now in this case, however, we have a bit of an exception to this idea. We want to translate with the same terminology as we used before. And the reason why we want to do that is just because these are referring to the exact same thing, and we want to be consistent throughout the UI, right? So there's a distinction here in what we are going to practice for this purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this original string here, pop it into here, and we can adjust this a little bit. So in the original, it says, I agree to Common Voice's terms and privacy notice, but we actually have to turn this around because it's not really a word quite like agree here in Toki Pona. You can say things like nilipona tawami, that is good to me. So we can have lawakepeken, the rules of usage, and nasin pilenzona, the method of secret knowledge or knowledge secrets, so your privacy. Lipona tawa mi. So we're saying the terms, the lawakepeken, and the privacy policy, the nasin pilenzona, li pona tawa mi, they are good to me. Simple enough. Now, being reasonably familiar with like agreeing to privacy policies in terms of use and all that, you can kind of get the idea that this is like a UI that pops up, and it has context here. It says accept privacy and terms. So it gives us a good bit of information on what is going on and why this or how this sentence should be translated. So this is like a button that would say, hey, I agree to this. So we save that. Boom. All right. How about download the dataset? Well, what is the dataset? The dataset is the actual output of Common Voice, the project, as it were, the most important part of the project. What's going on here is as people make tons and tons of recordings, you can download those recordings together with the sentences that they were recorded from. Those will have been processed, they'll have been checked for like cleanliness and quality by other people who practice in that language, who contribute to Common Voice. And altogether, you'll have a really good set of voice clips together with the sentences that lets you do really cool things. So if you want to download the dataset, that is, well, download, maybe that's an instruction, or is this an opportunity? Well, right here we have the string, download the dataset. Okay, so this is basically an instruction, right? You could also interpret it like a heading, like here is the place where you can download the dataset, right? But we're going to treat it like an instruction. And we can say o kama yo. So we remember before that we used pana for upload. Here we can say kama yo, receive, for download. You can also just say o yo, and it's basically the same idea. But I think kama yo is clearer here because you haven't received it yet. You're going to receive it, right? O kama yo e. Now, what is the data set? Well, there's a lot of different things we could call it. We could call it a kulupu lipu, as in a group of documents. We could call it a kulupu kalama, since it is a collection of sound files, right? But we actually see here that further down, we've already translated this idea. The dataset is a kulupu kalama. And like I said, normally we wouldn't really want to reuse phrases, but in this context where we want to keep it consistent throughout this particular project, yeah, this is perfectly fine. Okama yo e kulupu kalama. Easy enough. And of course, that will become the heading on the site. And there's a couple of different things in here. So this one, for example, I probably will not be doing on stream, but I'll take a moment to discuss why. So SHA-256 checksum copied. The trouble with this one is that it comes with a lot of technical baggage, right? Somebody who is familiar with software development, or at least is like technical on a basic level, probably has seen this terminology before and has an idea of what it means. And of course, copying is really easy to understand. We're just receiving it. But it's still a little bit troublesome to translate this idea because a checksum is a number that represents the veracity, the known quality of a given file or object on the internet. And expressing that in a couple of words in just a phrase is actually kind of difficult. I suppose we could translate this, though. We can give this a shot. So for starters, we want the tool to be talking to the user. So we said before that the tool is me. The tool is speaking whenever it says something to you. It says here, upload this clip, keeps failing, keep trying. Down here, it's telling you that you, implied you, copied the checksum, right? Of course, the terminology in English is turned around. The sentence order is passive, and it doesn't specify the subject, but we can tell that this is spoken to the user, and it's something that it's an action that the user takes. So we can say, Sina, kama yo, okay, what is this checksum? Well, let's call it, let's be a little bit lazy. That right there. Sina kama yo nanpa p nasin SHA 256. Now, on one hand, we could translate this idea of a checksum more clearly. We could be like, yeah, this is a number that represents the veracity of the file. But that, again, is a little bit complex to get across in just a couple of phrases, and that's not really important. But if we wanted to preserve this idea and respect the fact that SHA-256 is kind of itself a proper noun, well, we can just borrow it right into the Toki Pona, and this is basically fine. There are different ways you could do it, but this is a solid way. So, okamayoe nanpa, the checksum, P, nasin, SHA 256, nasin being a method. So here, I'm recognizing that SHA-256 is a method, a means of producing a checksum. And so we're a number that's in this method, SHA-256. And if somebody recognizes SHA-256, they're set. Otherwise, they have the number. We can save that. Failed to copy SHA-256 checksum. So here we can kind of apply the same idea. Pakalala, so brokenly or unfortunately or badly, right? Not necessarily badly. I suppose brokenly is more clear to get at this idea. Something is wrong in this context. Sina kama yo ala nanpa p nasin SHA-256. So we're basically borrowing this same original phrasing. Uh, and we want to express that the user is trying but failing to receive this number to copy it. The trouble here is if we didn't have pakalala, sinakamayo ala and nanpa pinasin sha 256, well, this here doesn't actually express that it was a fault, that it was something that went wrong. All it really tells you is you didn't receive the number, right? We want to keep the information that it failed. So pakalala gives us that specific information. Yeah, this was something that went wrong and you didn't receive the number. Let's save that. Now, clipboard not supported. This one is another troublesome one. And we actually have a little bit of help here from a previous project where we translated clipboard as Toki sitelen. Toki sitelen is a pretty clear way of getting at the idea of a clipboard. It is a location, a container on your computer that is used to preserve pictures or text or files for short periods of time. Copy them and paste them to another location, so send them somewhere else. Now, the trouble here is that how do we get across the idea that this is not usable? Well, we could say that this is a statement from the tool itself. The tool is unable to use your clipboard. And the reason why we want to do that is because we just want to be clear that this is the tool talking to the user, expressing to the user, hey, this is like what's going on. Mi ken ala kepeken. Now we're going to reuse this terminology here to refer to the clipboard. Toki sitelen sina. We're clarifying that it's yours. Now, this may not be an ideal translation in context, but we can go look for this string. It says it's on the datasets page. So let's hop back over here and see. Probably we're not going to be able to find this directly on the page because it probably comes from some error. Like if your browser says, hey, I can't use your clipboard. So probably that issue would crop up if I had my clipboard disabled. But we can see here, the SHA-256 checksum is right here. And if we click it, we get that checksum copied string. So presumably, it would pop up right here in red if something went wrong. So if we hop back over here, Mikena la kepeken poki sitelensina. Okay, that's one way we could express it. But we could also say, Sina ken ala kama yo e sitelen. So these are two different ways we could translate the same idea. Mikena la kepeken poki sitelen sina. That would be, I'm unable to use your clipboard. We're kind of glossing over the idea of poki sitelen as definitely being a clipboard, but this is just one way to express it. But the other way we could express this is sina ken ala kama yo e sitelen. That is, you cannot receive writings or symbols. This is, like I said, another way you could express it because the idea here is that we don't actually have to refer to the clipboard. We can just say you're unable to receive whatever you were trying to copy. You're unable to put it in a container, for example. I think I prefer the second of these. And then I should go back and note. So over here I said, pakalala sina kamayo ala and nanpa pinasin sha 256. That is, brokenly, you did not receive the number, the checksum, right? But over here, this isn't a mistake or something breaking. It's that the clipboard is simply not usable, probably due to the user's choice. So we don't have to clarify that it was caused by something in particular. We just know, yeah, I can't use the clipboard. It's not allowed. So you can't use the clipboard. Or we could say, mi kenala kepeken nasin sitelen sina. Perhaps that's not as clear, right? And reason why nasin sitelen there, writing method, we could be talking about typing, like your keyboard, your means of speaking, or your means of, excuse me, not speaking, but typing, right? Might be the way that would be read. Sina kenala kamayo esitilen, you were unable to receive a writing, probably the most clear. Now, then we have translations like this, partnerships. Partnerships is kind of interesting, right? This is just a big heading somewhere on the page. It says it's on the partnerships page. We can scroll up to the top here. And there's actually an untranslated string, partner. So what is a partner of Mozilla Common Voice? Well, it looks like it's companies, foundations, nonprofit organizations, people and governments and universities, yeah, all sorts of different organizations that partner with this project, the Common Voice project, in order to make this project better and take better advantage of all the data that this project produces. So overall, how would we translate this idea? Well, if you are in a partnership, if you are working with somebody, you might say, in at least a metaphorical sense, you are at their side. You are close to them. So we could say, kulupu poka. Boom. Easy enough. And I would say the reason why that works so well, for starters, I chose kulupu because pretty much everything here is not referring to individuals. It's referring to organizations. We have corporates and companies. We have small businesses, startups, universities, governments, foundations. And the big thing that all of these have in common is being communities or groups, right? We have collections of people working together toward a common goal. And so these are definitely kulupu. And otherwise, we have poka there to specify that these are close groups. These are groups at the side of something. And of course, if you're looking at this on this list up top, you would be like, kulupu poka. Oh, okay. So like related groups beside groups. You get the idea. Yeah, what's up? Yeah, what's up? Ah, failed, yes. Yep. It could be better. Uh, Honestly, from my point of view, these are basically the same thing. One way or another, you're expressing the fact that you didn't receive it. In kama ala yo, you're negating this preverb specifically. So it's like the thing didn't arrive. Uh, but if we say kama yo ala instead, we're just saying the yo didn't happen. The yo is negated. So you didn't have, right? But ultimately, the result is the same. One way, the arriving of the having didn't happen, and the other way, the having didn't happen. But in both cases, we're expressing the same idea. Now, yeah, so it's not true that, like, won't be the true in every single case. If I say, sina kama ala yo e nanpa, that could be subtly different from kama yo ala e nanpa, right? But in this context, I think they do express basically the same thing. Does that make sense? Right. So that is definitely one interpretation that's entirely possible. Uh, Honestly, I feel like in context it will be understood. But yeah, that is one potential concern. And so it might be a little bit more clear to say kama ala yo. So like the arriving of the having never happened, right? Yeah. All right. And oh, let's go ahead and save that one. So we have down here, get in touch. Okay. Well, this is an interesting case because what it's talking about here is not the idea of literally touching. And it's relatively common for new speakers to look at an idea like this, see the word touch, and go, oh, how did I express that before? Maybe pilin or luka, right? The idea of feeling something or the idea of coming into contact with something with your arm or hand, right? But this isn't talking about actual feeling touch. It is talking about the idea of talking, of communicating with the company leaving this message behind. So to get in touch is to communicate with communicate with somebody for the first time. Well, not necessarily for the first time, I suppose, but to communicate with somebody, to come into contact with that somebody, right? So we could say o kama toki, that is become talking. We could say o toki tawa mi. This could be misconstrued as talking to the tool. O toki tawa kulupu. These are all three different ways we could express this idea, right? Either way, it's definitely an instruction like, hey, you have this option, come talk to us. But who is speaking here? Well, let's go to the partnerships page. Oh, hey, right there. It's big old blue button, get in touch. We can click this and you might be able to see it on the stream, but it pops up a little mail to. It says you can mail commonvoice@mozilla.com to become a partner. So actually, we could totally say o toki tawa mi, right? But personally, I think o kama toki, so become speaking, this actually works really, really well. And the reason I think this works really, really well is because we don't need a preposition to specify who you're speaking to in the context that we're on this page and we can see, hey, we're talking about partnerships. They're talking about, do you want to partner with us? And we've yet to translate that one in particular, but we'll get to that. I think it would be reasonably clear without an object that it means to say you're going to become talking to the people behind this project, behind this tool. Okamatoki, get in touch. But of course, let me back up a little bit and say all these different ways, all these different ways, I appear to have lost them. The different ways to express this string are just like examples of how translation works in Toki Pona. It's not one cut and dry thing. And frankly, translation is not one cut and dry thing in any language. You're making all sorts of different, almost creative decisions about what information to keep or to let go. So throughout the process, it's like, what things are important? What things are relevant? What things do my listeners, do my readers need to know? In this case, get in touch. They don't specify who they're talking to, so I think we can reliably do the same. Okama toki. And of course, we already translated that. Become a common voice partner. Okay, how do we translate this one? Well, we translated the idea of a partner before as being a kulupu poka. The partnerships are kulupu poka, the related groups. The similar or the side by groups, right? To become is actually, as clearly as it gets, a kind of kama. And of course, this whole thing, like many of the other translations, is an instruction. So, o kama. But what are we going to kama? Well, okama poka, I think, is a really good way to get at this idea. You are coming to the side of common voice. You're coming to the side of common voice. So you don't need to specify you're becoming a kulupu poka because you could be already acting on behalf of a organization and know that you're a group, right? You could also be an individual who's like striking out on your own, wanting to just talk to the Mozilla Common Voice community, or rather the organization behind Common Voice, right? So here, we want to express the idea that we're gaining the property poka. O kama poka, pi kulupu, as in the group. And we're just going to use the proper noun common voice here. O kama poka, pi kulupu, common voice. So here, this translation is a teensy bit literal, I suppose, but, well, aside from poka, but we're saying essentially become at the side of the community common voice. And here, poka pi kulupu common voice is like a whole big property, one big property that specifies you are at the side of the community common voice, or the organization common voice. We can go ahead and save that one. Now let's go back to this big paragraph up here. It takes a lot to make common voice happen. We don't do it alone. Want to partner with us? We'd love to hear from you. Okay, What is going on here? Well, we have a couple of different sentences with different ideas to translate within it, right? Uh, when they're referring to making common voice happen, they're kind of treating common voice as an action you can take, right? Or as an event that can occur. That's like an interpretation of the English statement here, right? But we can take advantage of that. We can also say that the tool, the website, is speaking on its own behalf. So, or we could say that, or we could specify common voice as the subject. There's a couple different ways we could approach this, right? So we could say something like, Mi o pali mute tawa pali common voice. That's a little bit kludgy. Well, this is one particular expression, but let's try another one. This would be, just for reference, something like, I must work a lot for the work named common voice, right? But we could instead say, Hali common voice, li mutea. And I think this is very, very clear. The work named common voice is a lot. And we're adding that little emphasis particle, right? We're saying, hey, we feel strongly about this. That's our first sentence. It takes a lot to make common voice happen. Well, this original idea is like, there is a lot of work involved in creating Mozilla Common Voice. But we don't have to translate it like word for word as is, because this doesn't really work. Like, if we were to try to translate this word for word, it wouldn't really work in Toki Pona anymore. But we can flip it around. We can say that the work called common voice is a lot. Now, something to note is that a lot of speakers will do something like pali common voice, li pali mutea. And this isn't wrong. This isn't wrong at all. You're saying the work named common voice is a very work, is a large amount of work. That's not wrong at all. But since we're already using this pali head noun to refer to common voice, we can just kind of drop this. Perfectly fine. Pali common voice, li mutea. We're describing common voice, the work named common voice, as being a lot. Next sentence. We don't do it alone. All right, this one's actually pretty hard. This one's actually pretty hard. Because, of course, there's a couple different ways you can express the idea of loneliness. The community is speaking on its own behalf, but we haven't, like in this case, already established a community, a organization that works on Common Voice. So how do we work about this one? Well, actually, I would like to ignore this one for now. This is one of those things where, like I said before, we have some creative freedom when it comes to the translations. We don't have to express it exactly as it is on the page. We can instead do kind of what we want, and as long as we ultimately express the same idea, we're good. And so let's back up and look at the high level. What is this whole sentence trying to express? We don't do it alone. Want to partner with us? We'd love to hear from you. Well, they're saying that because Common Voice is a lot of work, they get people to help them, and they want people to come and help. So we could say something like, and we're instead of translating, we're going to express the similar idea that we just discussed. Nila kulupu mute, many communities. Li kama, li pali, lon poka, li pona e ilo. So here, I'm kind of working through a couple of different ideas about how these different communities come together to work on Common Voice. So, kulupumute li kama, many groups arrive. Li pali lon poka, as in they work beside, and we don't have to specify the kind of poka because in this context we're already talking about working on Common Voice, right? Li pona e ilo, and they improve the tool. And that's really it. We've expressed fully the idea that many groups show up and they help work on the tool. We don't need to say we don't do it alone very literally when we can say there are other groups that help us, right? So we've kind of express the same idea, but from the opposite angle. Now, let's continue from here. We still need to express the idea, do you want to partner with us as well? So we could say, sino wile ala wile poka. We can rely on that translation we did before, where we described becoming poka as being one of the partner communities. And then lastly, we can rely on this sentence structure, this question structure we created to express the last part. We'd love to hear from you. We could say, wile la o kama toki. Tawa mi. Pali common voice, li mutea. Common voice is a lot of work. In this context, so it being a lot of work, many groups arrive, work beside us, and improve the tool. Do you want to be beside us? If you want to, come talk to us. That's the full translation. And this is a very, very cool one because, like I said, the process of translation in Toki Pona is very, very open-ended. And like I said, it's a creative process. It's a creative process. We're not translating, I think, most of these sentences literally, but we do get across the same idea. There's a lot going on. We want you to come help. If you want to, come talk to us. So we can save that. All right, we're going to hop over to another translation project. So let's go over to Telegram here. So if you're not familiar, Telegram is a messaging app. It is fairly popular. I actually don't know how many users it has, but I know for a fact that, excuse me, I use Telegram. A couple of my friends use Telegram, and out of my contacts list, I'll get like, hey, this person joined Telegram, like every other day. So it does seem like Telegram is reasonably popular. And at some point, actually, back in like 2018, somebody was like, yeah, we can just add custom translations to Telegram, so let's do Toki Pona, right? And I talked to them, got on the project, and like I said way back when we started, this is a project that I worked on a lot when I was still learning Toki Pona. There were a lot of really, really cool things about translating this project that made me realize like how powerful all these different like core ideas are in Toki Pona. So for example, something as simple as the idea of pinning a message, right? You could say you could move the message all the way to the top of the chat box, right? And that can get across the idea. You could say mitawa esitelen tawa sewi lipu, or something like that. That would be, I move the writing, the message, to the top of the document, top of the chat. And yeah, that can do a lot of the work. But you don't have to go nearly that verbose. In this case, you all you really have to say is that the chat is now up. So the idea of pinning a message can be something like o sewi e lipu, o sewi e sitelen, one way or the other. Or if you're already in the context of having right-clicked or maybe long pressed on a single message, you could say o sewi. And that alone can express the entire idea of pinning the message, right? So, like I said, this is one of the very, very exciting and cool things that made me very, very passionate about Toki Pona. Just like realizing how much you can express with so few words, right? And so I would scroll through here, poking at different ideas, poking at different translations, and just kind of exploring how can I express all these different things. And of course, being a user interface, it kind of falls victim to the same issue we ran into before, where we want to keep reusing the terminology that existed before that was already used in the translation. So with a project this large, I mean, it has 15,000 strings. That's a lot. You kind of end up with disjoint strings. So the idea of a sticker, for example, there's actually stickers on Discord as well, so I'm sure all of you are familiar. But the stickers on Telegram sometimes get translated as sitilen musi, as in like fun writings, fun symbols, and sometimes they get translated as sitilen suli, large pictures. And that's not really a problem, mind you. But a lot of times the user interface is designed with consistency in mind, so it can be a little weird when in like one section of the UI it refers to it as one thing as sitilen musi, and then in a totally different section of the UI it refers to it as sitilen suli. Neither are wrong, but for an end user experience it's a little weird. So let me get into a couple of these translations. We're going to look at a couple of these. For starters, let's look for a longer and more interesting one, right? A lot of these are like really generic functional things on the application, and they are variously not that interesting. Here is an example of an older translation. Actually, that's not even all that old. That's relatively recent. What's going on here? Let's examine the context. So, we have on what looks like Telegram desktop. Yep. We are trying to send a message, but it says slow mode is active. You can send your next message in this amount of time. So whoever this was that tried to translate it, they chose to transliterate second into Toki Pona. And for the purpose of a user interface that cares about precision and all these like specific terminologies, yeah, it might be fine. It might be fine to transliterate these units. But I think we can go without that. For starters, here we're just translating the individual idea of seconds, so that's not too bad. We could say, is it letting me type? There we go. Tempo lili could be one expression of the idea. And I think this is basically fine. To somebody who like glances at this, they're gonna go, okay, what's going on? I can't send a message. Why is that? And they can see the little pop-up message, and it says you can send your next message in this amount of time. And we know that obviously time is gonna have a tempo head noun, but then why do we need to put lili if they can see the number counting down very quickly? Well, the answer is really we don't. But I think it's a helpful bit of hinting to be like, this is a small amount of time and you don't really need to worry about it. Otherwise, the count is going to be an actual number in Arabic numeral, so we just kind of preserve that with the variable they give us. We can copy that, paste it down here. Easy enough. Telegram offers like options for plurality, and of course different languages have different ways of expressing plurality, but Telegram I think kind of enforces across the board. You either have singular or plural for most cases. And of course, there is no difference between these in Toki Pona. The way you express singulars or plurals is exactly the same. Now, funny enough, I don't think I'm obligated to use the variable, but of course, it would not be very kind of your UI to not tell you how many seconds you had to wait. Because in this case, slow mode can last like, I think up to 5 minutes or something like that. Or it could be like 5 seconds. It could be very, very short. Anyway, let's go ahead and apply that. So now we know that this little message here will explain to the user they can speak again after this amount of time, and they'll visibly see it count down. Now what's going on here? It looks like somebody went through and did their best to translate things, but we here have the option to unmute, and the image for context here is that we can unmute the notifications for a group. So there's a couple different ways we could express this. Oop, it jumped me here. So we could say like, o kute e mu. So we could be saying like, listen to the notification sound. Or it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek translation, but we're translating the notification sound as a moo, as an animal sound, because, you know, it's kind of a cute way. It's a little bit of a touch of Toki Pona's culture, I suppose, to treat more things than just literal animal sounds as moo. And I love it. Uh, but we could say okute emu. We could say maybe o ken. Oops, there we go. O ken emu. And I think both of these kind of get at the same idea. We're allowing the notifications to come through from this group chat. So let's say o ken emu, allow the animal sound, is perfectly fine. We can pop up to here. O lukin ala is the proposed translation from before. We have, let's see, what are these? We can hide sponsored ads. So this is a recent feature of Telegram where users can kind of monetize the platform a little bit. They can place an ad via their own account and they get some money back for it. Kind of like you see sponsorships on YouTube, but these are messages. And you have the option to hide these sponsored messages, which is, I think, a good feature because, sometimes you just really don't want the advertising in your face, right? You really don't. I would say most of the time. Anyway, we have the option to hide the message. And yeah, that is the idea, o looking ala, as in don't look. But I want to be a little bit more drastic. O weka. O weka. And of course, since we're selecting this message directly, we can be like, yeah, we're removing it. Now, there is a bit of trouble here. Elsewhere in the UI, since I'm familiar with this, I know that it uses weka to refer to deletion. You can delete messages this way. But I think it's okay to translate this one as oweka as well for one simple reason. The Telegram UI actually highlights the delete the delete option in red, where it doesn't translate, or it doesn't highlight this option to hide. So that's one way we could get at this idea. We could also, for example, actually just go back to the translation that this person suggested and say, oh, looking ala, don't look at this thing. And that actually does get at the idea pretty well. So that's kind of two very, very similar options for how to express this. They do get at the same idea. And in context, I think a user would understand one way or another, this thing is going to be gone. From your point of view, it's going to be gone, right? Now, when I come across two different translations here that I'm like, these are basically the same, right? I just say to myself, actually, let's go with the shorter of the two. It's generally the Telegram UI is designed first around English, which is just a matter of fact that the developers of Telegram originally developed it in English and for English markets. And so that's kind of a truth of the history of the platform. It's just like English came first and it continued being a priority. Fortunately, it supports a lot of different languages now and things are better, but if you still make this message a bit too large, it's going to be really, really troublesome to actually get information out of it when you're actually using Telegram. So it's not that great. We're going to keep oweka. Now, little note here, we have different options for the different platforms you can translate it on. So let's just copy that. Hop over to iOS. Whoop. And just Android. And fortunately, these all do apply to the same string. So we've gotten rid of all those, or we've translated all of those together. Cool. Me looking esitilen ante. What's this one? Use an emoji. Okay. So this one's kind of fun. What's going on here is that you have the option over here on the left to upload your avatar. And when you upload your avatar, you can use a file right off your phone. You can, actually, in this case, it's Telegram desktop. So you can use a file off your computer, excuse me. You can use your camera if you have a camera available on your computer, so your laptop, for example. Or right here, it says you can use an emoji. So you have the option, instead of having a dedicated avatar, you can just use a pre-existing emoji, and it's perfectly fine. In fact, Telegram has a fair number of custom emojis, so maybe that's not so bad. So, a couple different ways we could translate this. Well, we know emoji as pretty clearly a proper noun, right? Uh, it is very, very common that you might see it just transliterated into Toki Pona, just because the idea of an emoji, it's like a small picture, so sitelen lili, maybe, or it's a goofy picture or a funny picture, sitelen musi. And you could put those together. You could express it by both properties, sitelen musi lili or sitelen lili musi. Both of those, of course, are the same. But then we make it kind of large. So let's actually look back at the sentence. Use an emoji. Well, we can get using pretty easily. O kepeken. Ooh, I can type. There we go. And then we're going to kepeken something. Well, options here, like I said, sitelen lili. I'll put a little slash here to indicate I'm still working on it. Sitelen musi. Sitelen emosi. We could say sitelen emosi. Just to like translate it or transliterate it, excuse me, into Toki Pona. This is one of our options. None of these are really all that relevant, I would say. Like, they're not that big of a deal. The difference between them is not that big of a deal. They do all ultimately express the same thing, but we do have to be a little cautious, right? Because this is being shown up against using a file and using your camera, right? So I think we do have to go with the most clear option of transliterating emoji. And the reason why is because if we say sitelen lili or we say sitelen musi, well, those, as from a reader's point of view, could still be files on your computer. But I think sitelen emosi, sometimes we just accept that we're going to transliterate a proper noun. It works perfectly fine. And it's more clear than the other options. It's distinct from uploading a file or using a picture from your gallery on your phone. Submit and apply. And we can pop this one in over here. We can see the options here are actually a little bit distinct on iOS, where instead of saying file, it now says open gallery. Same idea, basically. You're getting the file, getting the image off of your device, whatever it happens to be. Now, oh, wait a minute. The string here is actually a little bit different. Instead of saying use an emoji, it now says set emoji. Now, it's still accomplishing the same thing. That's why these couple are grouped together. But it is interesting that it's different here, that it's no longer use emoji, right? So I think we're okay with set emoji becoming okepeken sitelen emoji. It is a little large for the mobile UI, but I think it will fit. But the translation changing a little bit here. I got a comment in the chat. I think emoji keeps the original intent that it is used to communicate tone or emotion. Sitelen pilin. Sitelen pitoki pilin. That is actually a really great point. You could totally translate the idea of an emoji by the idea that they often express specific feelings. But that's something I want to shy away from. And I guess I had the thought, but I didn't mention it before. That's something I want to shy away from for sitelen musi as well. Not because that's wrong. There are plenty of emojis that are specifically used to communicate tone or emotion. That's a great point. But you have this secondary issue that crops up where not every emoji is like that. Like, I wouldn't say that the flag emojis, for example, express tones or emotions necessarily. They could, but they don't necessarily. And there are plenty of other emojis as well. Like, I don't know, the emojis of food that aren't expressing a specific feeling necessarily. Of course, some of them have over time developed meanings of their own. Yeah, there are a couple of infamous examples I think I don't need to name. But on the whole, a lot of emojis are just kind of there and being a cute little picture that you can post, but they're not really expressing a feeling. And that applies back to the translation I suggested before as well. So the sitelen musi idea, in that case, not all of the emojis are funny. Not all of them are goofy, right? And basically the same examples apply here, like the flags, the food, not really not really goofy or funny, not very moosey. So again, we still have this idea that the most clear collection of all of them comes under the name emosi, right? Does that make sense? Oh yeah, you already did say that. Makes sense. Cool, cool. All right, so we are gonna move on. Let's go ahead and translate this. Here it goes back to saying use an emoji, okepikensita an emoji, and we are set. And I'm actually enunciating that a little bit incorrectly because I'm pronouncing it a little bit too much like English. So let me speak it clearly real quick. In English, it is emoji, where that second syllable is emphasized, but in Toki Pona, you emphasize the first syllable even with transliterated names. So it's emosi. Sitelen emosi. We can go back through these. Now, there are a couple of these that I actually can't assign a translation for, even though I've done so before. Oops. That was which one of these? This one. Excuse me. Yeah, I can't translate these even though I've added strings for them before, and that's because they're listed as critical strings, and it says critical phrases can only be translated by coordinators of official languages. And, of course, in Telegram's context, Toki Pona is not an official language, and we are not coordinators of official languages. So, unfortunately, this will remain forever in English on the UI. And we have the same problem here, where we can't translate this as just Toki because it's a critical string. Let's have a look at this one. Good morning. So this is a little example text that shows up in the Telegram UI when it's showing you how some of its features work, right? This little good morning here is just a message from one character, Bob Harris. And it doesn't actually have to be translated as good morning. We could say, something like Tokia and preserve the same idea. And we can keep going here. Do you know what time it is? Now, we have a translation here from before, which asks, Sinasona alasona e ni, tempo ni li mute seme, which is translated, if I were to back translate that, that's something like, do you understand this, or do you know this? This time is how big, how large, how multiple. And this is not necessarily a wrong way to translate this idea, but there's actually a clearer way we can get at it. So let's make our own translation in here. We could say, ni li tempo seme. This is what time. So to those of us who are newer to Toki Pona in general, you might not be aware necessarily, or maybe not practiced with, the idea that seme doesn't have to be just in a part of speech. You don't have to have it right after li or right after e. You can have it as a modifier to another word, and that can still stand in as a question. You're asking, what kind of tempo is this, right? Now we've kind of flipped around the original question, but that's perfectly okay. So we're asking, this is what time? And it gets it across much more quickly and clearly. But that's not the only way we could do it. We could, for example, if I hit submit and apply here, we can add more options. We could say sina sona ala sona e tempo. So this is a question that might not work as well in Toki Pona as it does compared to its original English. So the original English is like, do you know what time it is? And somebody who's messing with you might hear this sentence and go, oh, yes, I do know what time it is. And that's the end of the statement because, of course, all you really asked is, do you know the time? But, of course, the intent of this question is, can you tell me what time it is, right? And if the intent of this question is, can you tell me what time it is? Then I don't think this proposed translation, sina sona ala sona e tempo, works. it doesn't work because, of course, in Tokipona, that question really is, the question really is, do you know the time? And not, what is the time? Can you tell me? Right? Niri Tenpo Seme, on the other hand, invites the listener to fill in the blank, to answer the question, what time is it? Right? So this is much more clear. Niri Tenpo Seme. Now, I have a comment again. The previous translation might need to be changed. I think the message is making fun of the person. Good morning. Do you know what time it is? You are translating to Toki ya sinesona ala sona e tempo. Is it making fun of them? Nah, I don't think it's making fun of them. We can see the little clock there that it's 11:40. And that's, like, not super the morning. But I can't really assume that this is... Is it making fun of them? Sina sona ala sona e tempo because it's a joke? That's actually a really good point. Do you know the time could be literally what they mean. Oh, that's really funny, actually. I didn't realize that. All right, sure. Sina sona ala sona e tempo. Do you know what time it is? Yeah, okay. But that means we do have to go back and change this to be more like good morning. So yeah, I originally said that, yeah, we could translate this as just Tokia, as a greeting, because good morning is generally a greeting in English that's specific to the morning time. But Tokipona doesn't have, like, time-centric greetings. They don't have salutations for different times of day. You could have them, for example. You could say, Tenpo suno pona, have a good day, in the form of an interjection, or a well wish, as it were. That's an option. And I think we could use that here. Actually, I'm going to go with suno o pona tawa sina. In the literal sense, this is like the light should be good to you. And this is something you might see every so often as like a way to say, hey, have a good day. It's not literally have a good day, of course. It is, but it's also like not literal in its translation back into English, right? You can literally translate this back into English as like, may the light of the sun be good to you. And that's very, very wordy and formal, but it's certainly not that formal in the original Tokipona. So we're going to use that one. Now we've preserved this probable joke here. It's like, Suno o Pona Tawasina. Have a good day. Good morning. Sina sona ala sona e tempo? Do you know the time? Thank you for pointing that out. That's actually really, really funny. That's really good. Now, this one's just a setting. We have the option to play a sound or not play a sound. And here is the option. It is off. Now, the person here apparently capitalized the word ala. We don't need a capital letter there, excuse me. Oh, I have a ping. Let me look at the chat. But yeah, don't I have the creative freedom to make any joke I want there? Yeah, absolutely. I can't change the time on there. I can only change the strings. But yeah, I can make basically any joke I want there. But I do like the fact that we can translate the original joke here, right? We actually can capture it. And honestly, it works even better in Tokipona because the question here, excuse me, is, do you know the time? Because like in English, we say, what time is it, to mean, can you tell me the time? But actually, they're not asking that. If you look at the clock, it says it's 11:40, almost noon. And so this first message that this person is replying to is good morning, right? And they're saying like, hi, welcome to the day. But the second person is like, hey, buddy, do you know what time it is? As an almost sarcastic way to say, hey, it's not morning. So in this case, they're not literally asking for the time, even though like I misunderstood this as asking for the time. They're not asking for the time. I got a question in here back in this one, which I appear to have lost. Wait, it's here. So this person asks, isn't it 11:40, which is still morning? Plus, please answer my original question. What was the original question? Can't we just say Tenpo open suno pona? So to answer that question, yes, you could say that for good morning. There are a lot of different ways you could say good morning. You also can just say Toki to mean hello, but of course I'm preserving the original joke, and that means I need to express somehow that it's morning. But yeah, you could say that. That's one option for sure. As for isn't it 11:40, which is still morning? Yes, that is still the morning, which is why I misunderstood the joke in the first place. But it is close enough to noon that it's understandable somebody might snark at you for calling it morning. So let's poke a bit more through here. What is this one? There's a translation already here. Advanced chat management. Oh boy. Okay, so this one is actually another one that's pretty difficult because it relies on a whole bunch of extra context that's going on in here. This is the description for Telegram Premium. Telegram Premium being a paid for feature of Telegram where you can get some extra capabilities, and those are all listed here. You can hide ads, you can have whatever reactions you want on messages, you can get fancy new stickers, you can have more channels, etc. Like it just goes and does a lot more for you. So it's very, very cool. But advanced chat management is the headline of one of these, there we go, one of these options. And this person here has translated it as Ken Piyanlawa Pi Tomotoki de Suli. So first let's look at their translation, how they got at this. Ken as a subject here is kind of an ability, so that's not bad at all. Piyanlawa, the people in charge. Pi Tomotoki, so a talking place, or a talking room rather. Li Suli. Yeah, I think this is very, very clear, but I'd like to know, is there a way we can do better? Can we improve upon this? Ken Piyanlawa Pi Tomotoki Li Suli. So in this case, I would, again, like we were doing with Common Voice before, I would like the UI to essentially speak to the user. And we should also look back at here and see what these options are for this advanced chat management. They say tools to set default folder, auto archive, and hide new chats from non-contacts. Okay, so we've actually uncovered a problem with this original translation. This is implying that you are gaining new abilities as an administrator of a channel. But I don't think that is what this is expressing. This is expressing that you have the ability to manage the channels you're in better. It's something that you just have as a utility on the Telegram UI. So let's say Sina Ken Lawa Pona e Tomo Sina. Sina Ken Lawa Pona e Tomo Sina. So that would be, you have the ability to control in a good way your rooms. And of course, in the context of this, you might assume that Tomo is the chats. If we wanted to be fully clear, Tomo Toki, I think is good as well. But the point is that it's not that the admins, the Yanlawa of each chat are becoming more powerful. It's that you have new options for managing the chats that you are in, and that's it. So, Sina Ken Lawa Pona e Tomo Toki Sina. We could also say Lawa Pi Tomo Toki Sina Li Kama Wawa. So like the control that you have over the talking rooms becomes powerful. And I think this is a good way to get at it for two reasons. First, they are talking about not necessarily a strict ability, because with regard to you being in a membership of chat, you already have all the abilities you need, really. But your control over them, what rules they follow, that can become more powerful. And otherwise, I do like the idea of using Wawa here, partly because this is a big ol' ad, right? This is literally an ad. And ads like to be exciting, and the word that most expresses the idea of excitement, at least in this context, is Wawa. We like, somebody does a big ol' backflip, you go, ah, Wawa, that's amazing, right? Maybe you get some really good news, and you could say like, mi pilin Pona Wawa, I'm feeling good in an ecstatic way. I'm feeling so powerfully good, right? Wawa in this case is a bit less literal than its original definition, right? Because its original definition has to do with strength, power, confidence, all sorts of different things. But amazement, excitement are also in there. And so we've, I think, successfully gotten across this idea. Let's pop this into the other translation options. It's kind of funny that the UI keeps like bouncing to the wrong spot every time I go to add a translation. All right. So I'm only going to be on here for a few more minutes, actually. I'm almost done here, but I would like to go on to one more project that has a much less fancy tooling. So Common Voice over here has this tool called Pontoon that makes it really, really easy to do translation. Telegram over here has uh, they have this very fancy utility for entering translations into the application. It's fantastic. But sometimes, sometimes things are not so clean. Sometimes you are given a JSON file, you dump that into Google Sheets, and you do your best. And so I, not that long ago, started looking into translating the game Slay the Spire. If you're not familiar, Slay the Spire is a card game and a roguelike rolled into one. So you have randomly generated maps that you explore, you get new cards, you use those cards to defeat enemies on your way up to the top, and if you make it far enough, you can defeat the corrupt heart and perform the action of the game, Slay the Spire. Roll credits. It is an incredibly cool and in-depth game. I love it to pieces. I've put a kind of embarrassing number of hours into the game because during 2020 I would wake up basically every morning and put like at least one good game in every single morning with coffee. It was a good time. But I love this game and I want to talk a little bit about this translation process. So I have not done a whole lot of the translation because, frankly, there's a lot of things going on here, right? There's a lot. There's a lot. And there's a lot of technical things here as well that are kind of complicated, kind of interesting to get your idea across, right? So, for example, in Slay the Spire, we have all these different keywords. So, for example, to draw is an action you take where you grab a card out of your deck and it goes to your hand so you can start playing it. You have discard, so you remove a card from your hand, it goes to your discard pile and you can't play it anymore. You have exhaust, so the card is permanently gone, at least for the remainder of a given fight. You have block, you have upgrade, you have powers, you have dexterity, you have all these different keywords, and I can't even scratch the surface for all the different things that you need to be cautious to translate only once, but they're gonna appear over and over and over again throughout the entire translation process. And of course, this isn't, like I said, this isn't quite the same as Common Voice or Telegram, where we have a lot more tooling to help us out, a lot more guidance. So often what you can do here, you can pop yourself up another browser and you can go side by side with some notes, say on Pastebin, or wherever in particular you want to save notes. I'm just suggesting Pastebin because it's easy. But you want to keep yourself like a personal glossary as you go. So in Slay the Spire, there are 3 card types. You have attacks that basically deal direct damage. You have skills, which either benefit you in some way or give you some block, so prevent you from taking damage. And then you have powers. Powers provide you a persistent benefit, but you can only use them once, then they're gone. So we can make ourselves a little personal glossary as we're going through here. And mind you, I'm not going to do too much of the translation. This is mostly a discussion process. But we can go through, we can say attack. We have power. We have skill. And since these are card types, we could say lipu utala, for example. A power could be a lipu wawa, and a skill, well, you might think it's like lipu ken, for example. I'm actually not sure offhand how I would translate the idea of a skill against these others, right? Like attacks are pretty clear. One way or another, it's going to involve utala, right? Because that's where you engage in combat. You're going to fight somebody else. Powers, I think it's pretty clear that Wawa gets that idea across very, very nicely. Wawa is telling you stuff like, yeah, there's a power. I mean, it's about as literally as you can translate the idea of a power. But then we have skills. And yeah, they're an ability. But is this clear against attack, power, and skill? Well, I don't know. I don't know. That's the answer. When it comes to translation projects like these, the best thing you can do for yourself is experiment. Do some portion of the translation, pop that into the game or into the UI, and see if it feels right when it's actually in context. And I think that's like one of the most important lessons I can give about the translation process. It's a matter of practice and understanding. It's a skill you gain over time. And for that matter, translation is a different skill from actually speaking Toki Pona. Of course, it will give you a lot of the same understandings, a lot of the same patterns and nuances that come with actually speaking Toki Pona. But yeah, you can totally get across this idea. And the best way to do it is to practice, is to drop these into the game and give them a shot. And so, yeah, during the process, it's also really nice to have a glossary to keep track of the words you care about, the words you've used throughout. So there are other ones like block is a keyword. Uh, and block is a number that represents how much damage you're going to prevent from happening. So you might say, let's see, it gains some number of block. We could say something like, yeah, Wawa Awen is not bad. Wawa Awen, or maybe just Awen. We could express block as instead a sentence, maybe. So the game will word it repeatedly as gain some amount of block, and you'll have this pattern appear quite a lot. Because of course, Slay the Spire, it comes from the long, long tradition of playing card games that go back to at least Magic the Gathering, if not earlier, where it's like we have this reasonably technical terminology where we kind of introduce an idea and use it in a way that's not actually similar to the original word in English. But we still get across this idea, right? So we could say block to gain block is kamayo e a pa 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 wawa awen o wawa awen esina. I don't know. This is kind of the fun thing, is like this initial part of the project where we have to decide uh how we even word these ideas. So at the very least, we can say that to protect yourself is to awen. So we can just say o awen esina. But how do we express the idea that you are protecting yourself to some degree? Well, we can be a little bit silly. O awen pimute, whatever number, esina. So here we're kind of getting around the idea that we're gaining block by saying we are uh, protecting ourselves to a certain degree that's expressed as an amount. So literally, awen pimute some number, we're going to protect ourselves to some degree, to some number. And let's try that out. O awen pimute the variable esina. Nanpa awen pi lipu ni li kamasuli. Pi mute this. Nanpa awen pi lipu ni li kamasuli pi mute this. Now, I want to clarify that these are not the translations I'm guaranteed to use by the end of this project. And frankly, this project is going to be a long, long one because, like, there's so many translations. There's so many. But this does work to get across our idea that we want to protect ourselves to some degree, and that degree is a precise number. I would keep the original column and write the translation in a new column. That is a good point. I will probably go back and adjust to that. But I originally imported this from a JSON, and having it still in this format lets me export in the same format. So yeah, I'll probably go back and adjust that, then just write my own tool to export. But yeah, we've expressed the idea that we gain protection by some degree. So here I'm translating the idea of exhaust. Lipu li moli. Actually, lipu o moli. So the reason I've chosen moli here as opposed to weka is because when you exhaust a card, in Slay the Spire, it is not playable for the rest of the game, right? Or rather, not for the rest of the game, but for the rest of that one combat. So it's also an action that in this case has to occur. When you play the card, it necessarily exhausts. So instead of saying that the card wekas, that it goes away, it actually dies. It molis. It's a little bit more permanent in this context. Oops, undo that. We have a similar keyword down here, ethereal. So ethereal means that it will disappear if you don't play it. One person in the chat points out, Weka would be discard. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that would be fantastic. In fact, we can just go ahead and put that down. Ethereal. So it exhausts if you don't play it. We might want to express that. Kepaken alala lipu o moli. So if it is not used, lipu o moli. And now there is a little bit of secondary trouble here that's unique to translating a game like Slay the Spire, which is that these keywords are meant to make the game's interface snappy and quickly understandable. But we can't really do that because, of course, we don't have individual, easily recognizable, snappy words in Toki Pona. We have a toolbox of somewhere between 120 and 130 words that we use to express these ideas as sentences far more often than not. And so this translation project is going to be long and detailed and going to produce very verbose cards. I feel like if I were to pick up a single Magic the Gathering card and try to translate it, it would be too much, or to translate it into Toki Pona. It would be larger than the card frame for a couple cards I could think of. But yeah, I think honestly I'm done here. So we've gone over, just as a bit of review, we've gone over the translation process for a couple different projects. We've gone over Mozilla Common Voice over here, right here. We spent a lot of time in there talking about different ways we can express the user interface, how the tool you are using speaks to you and sometimes speaks for you when it says me and then Sina, respectively. Then we got over here in Telegram, where we had actually a fantastic example of how you would preserve a joke, as written in English into Toki Pona. You won't necessarily be able to do that every single time, but certainly you can in this case. And we had a lot of other ideas expressed along the way, like how you would get across other different components of a user interface, how you would have the user interface communicate with the user. And then we didn't quite get to much translation in this context, where we have O Moli e Palisa, slay the spire. But we did get a lot of the ideas expressed that translation in this context depends, like the original English depends heavily on these keywords, and Toki Pona, of course, doesn't have any keywords to use. So how can we express the keywords as reasonably short phrases? We can do our best to preserve them being reasonably short. Lipu o Moli is not a bad way to express the idea of the card exhausting. Kepikan alala, Lipu o Moli is a bit more wordy, but we can see here we have this new line bit. Ethereal will be on its own line, so this being verbose, Kepikan alala, Lipu o Moli, is basically fine. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I hope y'all learned something cool today. I hope you figured out something cool about Toki Pona. If you like this event, please let me know. Please let me know what I could improve in the future. Please let me know if you want to see more of these. I would love to do more of these. Like I said, thank you so much for coming. I am going to hop out now. Mitawa.